Hey guys, another little bit of a distraction. We're on book review 171, Land of Two Halves by Joe Bennett. So he was just talking about Napier. This is in Joe's northern half of the island. If you haven't watched the first two reviews, well, I either edited them together in the earlier or you'll have to click on the earlier versions. And he was kind of enjoyed it in his sort of kind of Banner Way. I think he went to the pub there. It's like he goes to a pub about every place. From Napier, he went up to Taupo, Taupo. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. The biggest lake in all of New Zealand. They actually have tides there. And also the center of a lot of beautiful like waterfalls and things like that. But also the center of the trout fishing and fly fishing communities in Australia or in New Zealand, in northern New Zealand. Kind of waxed poetically about some of his past experiences with fly fishing, specifically the live bait versus uh, minnow. What do they call those things? Flies, like plastic flies. Uh, Debate in fly fishing and kind of talks to some local fly fishermen, but does not engage, I don't think, in any fly fishing this time. Next, he moves up to Rotorua, which is sort of the Yellowstone National Park, if you will, of New Zealand. It's got a lot of hot springs, various temperatures, and constantly smells of sulfur, of eggs. Um, I got a feeling it's still somewhat popular, but was probably at its heyday during what I call the spa era, which was the early 20th century when going to the like a natural spring spa was kind of a paramount vacation. I would just say most people don't do that as the height of vacation anymore. A lot of people just go to the beach or whatever. But it's still popular for its spas. People do go there. You get in the mud and let the water come over you. It's of various viscous viscosities. Some of them being very thick, some of them being thin, some of them being hotter, some of them being colder. But kind of Joe in his droll tone mentions that while it is quite nice, there's only so much you can do in a hot spring. For the most part, you just sit there and let the water absorb, the heat absorb into you, and it feels good. But you just kind of pretend not to stare at the other people that are all sitting in these large public baths with you. Um, Another thing he mentioned was when he was younger, the joys of seeing women underwater. So, but unfortunately, like swimming around and kind of being a little bit of a peeping Tom, if you will. But he said that because these waters were very muddy, just that's the natural way that they come out of the ground, there was no opportunity for that. I don't know why that's stuck in my head. That's stuck in my head. He gets a ride with a real estate dealer up north, or a real estate person up north that says to avoid uh, Turarunga, I think it is, which is the largest city the fastest growing city in New Zealand. Obviously, Auckland's the biggest. But he kind of byskirts that and goes up to the Coromandel Peninsula, I believe, including Taratua and Locksworth, where he really gets out. It's sort of like kind of like various parts of like Marin County or say like Byron Bay in Australia, where actually I am right now, or more or less, where it's this weird kind of combination of true hippies that live off the land and wealthy cityites from Auckland, which he was now getting pretty close to, that buy $1 million second properties on the Cornwall Peninsula. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. A couple people that he got rides with were complaining about the cost of real estate and that nobody could afford to live there anymore because it was all being put up. He kind of swings around the forget what bay it is, but now goes on to Auckland and the peninsulas towards the north. I don't really know. I should know what the name of that peninsula is, but I don't. Towards bananas. Yeah. And even though you'd think that he's starting to get into tropical territory here, he's really not. It's New Zealand, so it's still pretty cool. And it's actually kind of cloudy and rainy. He completely bypasses Auckland. He's been to Auckland before and has some comments on the city itself. But just in the spirit of not really wanting to, you know, I don't know. Hitchhiking just isn't really like a city activity, particularly like a big metropolis. People definitely ignore you. Mid-sized towns, yes. Standing outside mid-sized towns, country roads, yes. Or country highways, that's probably better. But big metropolises, it's not really a thing. So he actually rents a car to go up to the northern part of the peninsula, up to Cape Reinga. But along the way meets a giant dude that is actually, now he's not the hitchhiker, or he's the hitchhikee, I guess you'd say, and helps him up the coast, and essentially takes that road through Borksworth, where they have the Kaia trees, which are like some of the biggest trees in New Zealand. I don't exactly know how they compare to like the red sequoias or something like that, but they are these massive trees. One he visits that is believed to be the oldest in New Zealand is actually 2,000 years old, which would put it as a contemporary to Jesus Christ and the Bible, which just goes to show you how old these trees are and how majestic they are. He also goes up to the trees, gives it a nice pat, says wow for 2 minutes or whatever, and then walks away in classic Joe fashion. He mentions that there's only so much you can do when you're staring at a tree, you know. Goes up to Cape Regina. Yeah, Regina, yeah, I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sees where the two seas meet, and it's actually a phenomenon that is kind of unique to this part of New Zealand, though I'm sure it happens in other parts of the world. But, you know, sometimes when a sea and an ocean are just two bodies kind of around a land mass merge, they merge kind of peacefully. But this is this huge swirl of waves crashing, so they're not crashing against the coast anymore on either side, but they actually crash into one another. And it creates this swirling and just a sea that you could see why New Zealanders believe that when their body dies, this at the very northern point of New Zealand is where they go out into the swirling netherworld and back to Hawaii. Not the island of Hawaii, but the mythical Hawaii, that is their ancestral homeland. So I don't think I mentioned a lot about the Maori so far, but obviously it's mentioned in the book. They're very key people to the island. They're the natives of the island, though they only arrived in about 1000 to 1200 AD. And my general thought on this, and this is kind of how Joe feels about this too, is like there's some hypocrisies on both sides. I think you would say that the whites would probably be the oppressors. I mean, they were the colonizers. They were the one that took over the other people's land. The Maoris did integrate a lot of technology from the white settlers into their own practices, not superficially, but really as kind of part of who they are. But in general, I think that race relations between Maori and Paika, which is, I think I'm saying that right, which is a general word used for white people, even though Joe mentions in the book, white people are just as diverse in all their types as we should get Maori diversity for theirs. You know, Maori didn't even see themselves as a single unified race until white people came and started colonizing. They were all these different groups of people, you know. If you have no context for like what your little island is, then you don't see it as you versus England, let's say. You just see it as these different groups on the island, and so there was really no unifying force. But that being said, race relations, I think, in New Zealand are pretty bad until you look at race relations literally in every other country on Earth. So there's some problems with alcohol. There's some problems with, say, things like unemployment or whatever. But in general, it's uh, yeah. I you hate to put it on a gradient, but on a gradient, I think it's better than some other ones. He eventually goes down the coast, sees Hamilton, which is essentially a large country town because of the prosperity of the dairy industry in the area, has kind of expanded into like a mini city. I think it's like 100,000 or 80,000 or something like that. Um, but really doesn't have a lot of character. It really is sort of just the agricultural hub of the North Island, where farmers from the surrounding areas go and exchange whatever they need to exchange. He goes down to Raglan, which is the surf capital. One of them, I guess. I'm sure there's some other places, but it's considered one of the surf capitals of New Zealand. He meets a backpacker there that's there for 6 weeks. Or no, that's he meets a backpacker there, a younger person, and he actually goes to some backpackers later on his trip, but always gets private rooms. I always thought that was kind of interesting. But this backpacker was complaining about how he wasn't really able to see enough of New Zealand in the time that he was there. He was like a backpacker surfer type. Um, and then Joe asks this guy, who I think he still has the car at this point, or maybe it's the other way around. But he asked this guy, well, where have you been in New Zealand and how much time have you spent in Raglan? It's Raglan, right? Yeah. And he says, well, I have 8 weeks in New Zealand total, and I've spent 6 weeks in Raglan just surfing. So, he's complaining about how he didn't see New Zealand, but spent 6 weeks surfing in one spot. Um, After that, he goes down to New Plymouth, the Tom Cruise capital of the world. That's what people say, but uh, it's the reason they say that is because Mount Teaka. Let's see if I can find where that is in here. I know it starts with a T, but I'm just mangling it. Um, Taika. Mm, well, in any case, we're just gonna have to leave it mangled. Uh, that mountain is almost perfectly con- conical uh, volcano, very similar to Mount Fuji. And so, Edward Zwick, the director of the 2003 film The Last Samurai, decided to shoot here. Now, the star of The Last Samurai was Tom Cruise, and sort of became a local celebrity, just for the time being. And everyone always said positive things, whatever else, except for the Scientology, which Joe made a sly remark about. But yeah, he's considered like one of the first sort of that put New Zealand on the spotlight. This was around the same time that like the Lord of the Rings were coming out, and I think they shot like the parts of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, like the Narnia series. Yeah, the Narnia series in New Zealand. But it was at the time right when it was on the really hot peak of oh, celebrities saying that it's so beautiful, and it is. But it kind of also ruined it a little bit because now everybody wants to go to New Zealand, which is one of the reasons why Joe wrote this book. So yeah, where does he go after that? He goes to Wanganui, another sort of sleepy town along the coast, and then heads down to Wellington. Wellington being the capital. He didn't spend much time there. Actually, I think he only spent one day there, but it's essentially like crammed up along the coast. It's kind of like a well, it's just in geography only. It's like Queenstown in the south. Unlike Auckland, which is kind of sprawling and a big car city, Wellington has a very good public transportation system, and between the bay along the coast, which is the ocean, unlike Queenstown, which is along the lake, in the mountains, they just need to compact people in. So there's more sort of medium-sized high rises, medium rises, I don't know what you call them, yeah, you just get a feel for that. Now, New Zealand is famous for being very friendly and getting to know people. Well, he actually saw the Minister of Finance in a used bookstore by himself, just kind of like browsing the titles without any security detail in the bookstore at all. Now, if you take from the U.S. the Minister of Finance, or I don't know, the head of the Federal Reserve or whatever, I mean, he'd be in a bulletproof limo, and there'd be huge, beefy security guards all around him. You know, so I don't know if it's changed since Joe wrote this book, but it's along the same idea. But anyway, okay, I've been rambling quite a while now. So, Joe Bennett, The Land of Two Halves, after 50, oh, and he goes back and sees his dog. That's kind of the end of the book. A Land of Two Halves. After 15 years in New Zealand, Joe Bennett asked himself where on earth he was. By the titular Joe Bennett. All right, keep checking out the reviews, guys. Bye.